All right, next slide, Kristen. So our presenter today is Kristin Bogdonas. She is a nutrition and wellness educator for the University of Illinois Extension and works in the northwest part of the state. Her priority program areas include chronic disease prevention, food safety, and food preservation. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kristin, to get us started.
All right, thank you so much, Taylor, for the intro, and thank you to everyone for joining us today for the second session of our series. So why build a food and water supply? Well, if you were with us last week, Russell Medley talked about common disasters in our area and the fact that we are experiencing more disasters and more intense disasters than we have ever in our history. So building an emergency supply of food and water is a really smart move. FEMA recommends that individuals and families have at least 3 days supply on hand of food and water for everyone in their household. When emergencies occur, it could really be days or weeks before your power is restored. These are all the different types of disasters that we have seen in Illinois and across the Midwest. So having a supply of food and water on hand is important just so you can keep yourselves and your families fed and hydrated when disaster strikes. In today's session, we'll talk about the best types of foods to include, how to maintain your food supply over time, and food safety precautions that you can take before and after disasters. Additionally, we'll also take a look at water supply needs and how to make water safe to drink from sources either inside or outside of your home if necessary. So before we go on, I have a quick poll that I would like everyone to fill out if you could. So it's, do you have a food supply, water supply already established? So you can put yes, no. If you have a partial supply, maybe you have food but no water, you can do partially. I'm just curious to see what everybody has already on hand. All right, so it looks like most people have a partial supply. I'm going to end the poll. I'll share the results so everybody can see. So it looks like we have a partial supply at 43%, 30% are saying no, and then 27% are saying yes. So it's great that so many people have, some food or water on hand. So it's going to come in really handy during a disaster. So even though it's unlikely that emergency would cut off your food supply for 2 or more weeks, you may want to consider maintaining a supply that will last that long. And this can be as easy as increasing the amount of staples and non-perishable foods you normally have on hand. So each time you go to the grocery store, maybe over the next month, picking up a few extra things just to start stockpiling in maybe a separate location away from what you use day to day. Also, you'll want to consider other members in your household. If they eat certain meals away from home, maybe a child is eating school at lunch or your spouse is eating out on their lunch break, you'll want to factor those meals in and account for those calories in your food supply. All right, so thinking about items that you want to include, take into account your family's unique needs and taste preferences because familiar foods are really important during disaster. They help lift our morale and give us a feeling of security in times of stress. Foods that require no refrigeration, water, special preparation, or cooking are probably your best bet during a disaster situation. You'll want to focus on foods that are nutrient dense, so foods that contain a lot of vitamins and minerals, as opposed to the calorie dense foods that are high in sugar and fat. So you can then make sure you're getting at least one balanced meal each day. Trying to incorporate foods from all 5 of the food groups, which we'll look at in just a few slides, and also thinking about various forms of food that you can include. So if you only have frozen foods and your power is out for several days, this could result in a lot of food waste. and potential food shortage in your household. So we'll take a look at the different food groups and some good options that you may want to consider including in your supply. So for the protein group, thinking about, canned meats and fish like tuna, those are really easy to, travel with as well. Different kinds of nut butters, nuts and seeds are great options because they're high in protein. If you go to the grocery store and you see the big containers that the plastic with the screw top lid and they're sealed, those will have a nitrogen flush. So those are great to store just as they are. There's no need to repackage those. That nitrogen will keep them fresh longer than if you were to say just, to buy some nuts and seeds in the bulk section and packaging those yourself. Those are going to have a shorter shelf life. Dried meats, dried or canned beans, peas, and lentils. Those are great options. However, you'll want to think about how you're going to prepare those dried legumes. Those take a long time to cook. So if you don't have power, do you have the means to cook those longer cooking items? So there's something to think about. And we'll talk more about that in a little while as well. For the grain group, again, some of these foods are going to take longer to cook. Thinking about items that you can easily transport, like granola bars, granola oats, those don't take very long to cook. So those are probably going to be your better options for this category. The fruit group, making sure you have canned fruits available that are processed in their juice rather than in like a syrupy solution. Lots of dried fruits available. These are great. They're lightweight. They're easy to travel with. You can, purchase these from the store or you can dehydrate them yourself, but the home dehydrated varieties aren't going to last as long. I think the shelf life is around 6 to 12 months. But there are ways to extend that shelf life. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, fresh fruit with a longer shelf life would be things like apples, citrus. These are great for, a few days up to a couple weeks. In the vegetable group, we're looking at canned vegetables that are low in sodium. Anything that you have that's packaged, try to focus on the lower sodium varieties, since the high sodium foods and snack foods that we like to eat are going to make us feel more thirsty. So if we're in a disaster situation, water might be sparse. So we don't want to be eating a lot of salty foods. So getting things that are low sodium, dried vegetables, some frozen vegetables, and then of course our vegetables that have a long shelf life would be like our root veggies, winter squash. These are great to include in a pantry. And then we also have the dairy group. So some of these things you might not consider when thinking about your food supply, but powdered milk is an excellent item to have just on hand in general. You can mix it with water and drink it that way. It's also easy to use in a variety of different recipes just day to day. So this is something that I would recommend everybody just, store just to have as a backup. You can also find shelf-stable dairy products in the Tetra packs. Shelf-stable or powdered cheese products as well can come in handy if your family really enjoys these dairy foods. And then we have some special considerations. So individuals with, special diets or allergies will need particular attention, as will our babies and toddlers, our older adult populations. If you are a nursing mother, you may want to think about having some ready-to-feed liquid formula on hand in case you're able to nurse, because stress can do that to you. Nutritional shakes, juices, soups, these are all really helpful for people that may have fallen ill. If anyone in your household has a chronic disease, maybe diabetes, making sure that you have all of their medications, you have a list of what those medications are. And if they do have diabetes, thinking about, a simple sugar. So maybe a juice, glucose tablets that you can keep in your disaster kit or your food supply in case they're experiencing hypoglycemia would be really important to incorporate. And don't forget non-perishable foods for your pets. They also need to be included in your disaster plan, and they will need extra water as well. All right, so just a few food storage tips. We know that certain storage conditions can enhance the shelf life of our canned and dried foods. The ideal location for this is in a cool, dry, dark place, and the best temperature is between 50 to 70 degrees. You'll want to store foods away from any ranges or refrigerator exhaust, since heat can cause foods to spoil more quickly. And of course, if you have your food in a basement or garage or a shed somewhere where you're storing petroleum products like gasoline, oil, paint, solvents, just keep in mind that some food products can absorb their smell, so you'll want to keep those as separated as possible. Also think about the different types of pests and rodents that might be present. I've heard several people tell me that, they would prepare their food supply and then 6 months, a year later, they would go back to check on it. And they were upset to see that little mice got in and chewed through their boxes and everything was just kind of destroyed. So think about how you're going to store your boxed foods. It'll last a lot longer if you store them in a waterproof, airtight container like totes, or the larger 5-gallon screw top plastic buckets. If you have opened food packages, it's a good idea to empty those, like sugar, dried fruits, or nuts, empty those into some sort of screw top jar or airtight canister to protect them from pests as well. Remember to inspect also the food before you use it, especially with canned food. So if you see anything that's bulging, or if it has bubbles or foam when open, these are signs of food spoilage, so these should be discarded. You'll also want to throw out any canned goods that become swollen, dented, or corroded over time. And just remember to use foods before they go bad. So keeping an eye on your inventory, rotating them, making sure everything's dated. If you've ever worked in food service, you'll know the term first in, first out. So just remember to place items at the back of the storage area that are newer and your older ones in front. So just a couple of reflection questions here for you. So thinking about what we've talked about, different strategies we've looked at, what do you need to implement to protect your current food supply, either from air, chemical contamination, insects, etc.? And do any foods in your storage need to be rotated soon or disposed of? Something I found really helpful is to have a food inventory. So I just do a simple like paper or pencil. There's probably lots of apps out there that you can use for this. But I just like to write down everything that we have on hand, and the date in which it needs to be used by. So this makes it really easy for me to make sure things get used up properly, so I don't have a lot of food waste. So I wanted to spend a couple minutes just talking about the date labels that you'll see on packages. So before you start throwing away your outdated cans, it's important to know what these dates mean. There's a lot of confusion over these labels, as we've seen in research. An estimated 20% of consumer food waste comes from a misunderstanding of these date labels. So really the only thing that is regulated that needs to have a date on it is infant formula. Everything else is just up to the food manufacturer. And a lot of these dates are quality dates. So the sell by date, this is a freshness date. Best by and best if used by, this is also a quality date, and food will be safe to eat long past this date. So if you're looking at your canned goods, acidic canned food like tomato and pineapple will be good to eat 12 to 18 months past the best by date label. Non-acidic canned foods are good for 2 to 5 years after that date. So that would be your vegetables and soups. And the expiration date that you'll see, this is a true expiration date, and the food is not safe to eat past this. You'll see this date on infant formulas. So if you have a lot of food in your pantry and you're just not sure if it's still good, I would recommend checking out a website called stilltasty.com. Their food storage information is drawn from multiple academic institutions, and federal food safety sources, including the USDA, the FDA, and the CDC. And this is one of my go-to shelf life guides just to help me prevent a lot of food waste in our household. And it's been a huge help. You can search their database by a specific food item or by food category. So that's just a really good resource I wanted to share with you. So this slide has a variety of food items that naturally have a long shelf life. And these items can last for many years if they're kept in proper containers and storage conditions. So these are great things to have on hand in case of emergency. And remember, foods that are closer to their whole form will last longer than versions that have been processed or ground. But again, some of these whole foods could take longer to cook. So meal preparation is also something that you'll want to consider. So there may be some of you out there that, that you have some food supply, but you're wanting to extend the shelf life of foods. Maybe you're wanting to store foods for multiple years rather than multiple weeks. So to do that, Mylar bags are an excellent tool that you can use. These are made by layering thin sheets of aluminum foil between sheets of food grade plastic. And these are going to protect your food from light, moisture, and oxygen. So they can preserve the quality of your food for up to 30 years. So this is, again, good for people wanting to have a longer term food storage supply. There's different types available. There's standard, there's steel pack. So standard is a non-textured Mylar bag, and you can use these with oxygen absorbers. Steel pack, on the other hand, is going to be textured, and these are recommended for vacuum sealing. If cleaned properly, you can reuse your Mylar bags multiple times, but obviously, they're going to get smaller after each use. And just keep in mind that these are not rodent proof. So you'll want to store these in a tote or in a 5-gallon bucket, something to keep them away from pests with sharp teeth. Also, because Mylar bags retain moisture inside the bag, you do not want to store anything in here that has a moisture content of over 10%. So in other words, if the moisture is above 10%, do not vacuum seal or use oxygen absorbers with the Mylar bags. Here's some more information on oxygen absorbers, in case you're not as familiar with these. These contain an iron powder that becomes iron oxide in the presence of oxygen. So think of these kind of like little sponges that will continue to absorb oxygen until they are full. So these need to be kept sealed prior to use, just to ensure that they'll be able to absorb at their full capacity. And you'll see different sizes available if you're looking online to purchase these. Oxygen is measured in cubic centimeters, so you see the cc. The size of the oxygen absorber should correspond to the amount of oxygen they absorb. So the larger container that you are using, the larger the oxygen absorber that you'll want to purchase. And you can see that in the chart there. So just a couple things when you're filling your container. So in the photo on the bottom left, you'll see there's a large 5-gallon bucket there with, I believe it is rice in that larger Mylar bag. So if you are doing a large food supply, it's good to have a few extra hands available so you can get, all of your bags in the buckets, put all of your food product in the bags. And then once all of your food is in there, then open the package with the oxygen absorbers, place one of those packets on top of the food, and then work quickly to seal those bags, and then also work quickly to get the extra oxygen absorbers resealed. You don't want to leave them out for more than 30 minutes at a time. So you can reseal them in a Mylar bag, or you can put them in a mason jar. Just make sure that mason jar doesn't have any nicks in the top of it, because you don't want oxygen accidentally getting in there. They should not be confused with the desiccant packets because those absorb moisture, not oxygen. And oxygen absorbers need a small amount of moisture to work properly, so the silica gel packets should not be used in conjunction with these. So this is just some examples of foods and how long you can extend their shelf life when you use Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers together. So I had mentioned the home dehydrated fruits and vegetables earlier, only having a shelf life of 60, how long do they, 6 months, sorry, 6 months to a year. So if you put them in a Mylar bag with an O2 absorber, you can extend that shelf life up to 2 to 5 years, which is really good. And then at the bottom, you'll see some foods that you should not store with oxygen absorbers. That would be salt, sugar, and of course your high moisture foods. Okay, this next slide is all about meal preparation. So during a disaster or emergency, it can be really difficult due to, you might have damage to your home, you may not have electricity, gas, or water. So having some items on hand in your food supply or your disaster kit to help you prepare meals safely is really important. So again, your cooking utensils, cutlery, plates, a manual can opener if you have a lot of canned goods, aluminum foil for cooking purposes, and also your cooking device and fuel. So if your power is out, how are you going to cook all of the dried food that you have on hand? Maybe you have a grill, or maybe you have a portable, like a camping stove, something that you can easily take with you. And remember, you'll need a certain amount of fuel depending on the types of food you have. So it's a good idea to do a little research into the type of cooking device you have, how long it could possibly take to cook beans or oats or whatever it is that you're wanting to cook. And then again, how much fuel do you need to cook those particular items? All right, so we've talked about the types of foods we want to include, how to extend shelf life. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about certain food safety precautions to take after disasters. So we're going to look particularly at flooding, fires, and power outages. Okay, so an estimated 90% of natural disasters in the US involves flooding. I didn't know if you knew that, but I thought that was pretty surprising estimate. So if flooding is predicted, in your area, you can take measures beforehand and store food high up on shelves, which could potentially help prevent a lot of food waste from occurring, depending on how high that water gets. But be prepared to handle your food safely, and I'm going to give you some tips on what you can do. So if you do have flooding and you do have food that came in contact with that flood water, you're going to want to get rid of that food. Because floodwaters can contain a lot of pathogens and you just don't want to take that risk. Also discard any damaged cans or food that may be in non-waterproof containers. So examples of non-waterproof containers would be things that have screw caps, snap lids, pop tops, and crimped caps. Also discard like cardboard, juice, milk, baby formula boxes, and any home canned goods because these cannot be effectively cleaned and sanitized. So to clean and sanitize, of course, it's best to use hot soapy water to wash, do a rinse, and then you're going to want to sanitize by immersing those canned goods. And you can even do this with your dishes, pots, and pans. Immerse it in a gallon of water with a tablespoon of bleach for 15 minutes. Okay, so how to save undamaged food packages. There are several steps that you'll want to remember. So again, anything that's been commercially prepared, your canned goods, retort pouches can all be saved. So first, you're going to remove the labels if they are removable. Brush or wipe away any dirt or silt that might be present. Thoroughly wash your cans or retort pouches with soap and water. Then you do a rinse cycle on those. And again, sanitizing, you can either boil for 2 minutes, or you can place those items in a sanitizing solution. So if you have a lot of items to sanitize, you can do 5 gallons with the addition of 1 cup of bleach, and then of course, let it soak for that 15 minutes. After it's sanitized, you'll want to let it kind of air dry for an hour before opening or restoring, and then making sure that everything is relabeled if you took labels off, including the expiration date. All right, so power outages are pretty common in our area. I thought I was going to have one this morning when the lights were flickering as I was getting ready. We had a storm earlier today. So some good things to brush up on, since these are pretty frequent during the fall and winter months. Thinking about your food in your refrigerator and freezer. So food in your refrigerator will keep cold for about 4 hours if it's unopened. A full freezer will keep the temperature for approximately 48 hours, and 24 if it's half full and the door remains closed. If you are suspecting that a storm is coming your way, it might be a good idea to go out and purchase some dry or block ice to keep the refrigerator as cold as possible. 50 pounds of dry ice should keep an 18 cubic foot refrigerator that's stocked cold for 2 days. And you can purchase dry ice blocks or pellets at a variety of grocery stores and places like Walmart and Costco. And foods that you want to discard have been foods that have been above that 40 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 more hours, or if it's been at around 90 degrees for 1 hour. All right, so when the power comes back on, these are some steps that you can take as well. So in your freezer, it's a good idea to have a couple of food thermometers both in the freezer and the refrigerator. So if that temperature, remained at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below, foods may be refrozen. If you did not have a food thermometer in there, you'll need to check each package, determine its safety. So just look for ice crystals, and if you see those, you can safely refreeze or cook that food immediately. In your refrigerator, if the power is out for less than 4 hours, the food will be safe. And if it's above 40 for more than 4 hours, you just want to make sure you discard all of your perishable items like meat, poultry, milk and eggs, leftovers, and cheese. All right. And then, so we've talked about flooding, we've talked about power outages. So last but not least, we'll cover food safety after fires. Disasters such as home fires happen to 2 million Americans each year, which is quite a bit. Almost half of these are caused by cooking equipment. So for this reason, it's wise to make sure you have a fire extinguisher nearby, and you'll want to visually inspect that once per month. And it can be kind of stressful knowing what to do with these items. So these are just some reminders for you. When in doubt, throw it out. You don't want to risk, your safety for, a few canned goods. Cans, bottles, jars, anything that has come in contact with the heat, you'll want to throw those away. Also, anything that is in the refrigerator or freezer, this is not an airtight environment, so toxic fumes could have potentially gotten in there from the fire. So you'll probably want to get rid of those as well. Canned foods and cookware, such as pots and pans, can be decontaminated like we did with the floodwater situation. So again, you would just wash those items in hot soapy water, and then make your sanitizing solution with that 1 gallon of water, a tablespoon of regular bleach, and let those items submerge for 15 minutes. And then you can use that same concentration of sanitizing solution to clean all of your countertops. Okay, so that ends the food safety information. So we're going to switch gears from food, and we're going to take a look at building our water supply. So it's recommended that we store at least 1 gallon of water per person per day in the household, and also your pets will need to be included. So a pet will need about a half a gallon per day. You may want to consider storing more water than this if you live in an especially hot climate, if you are pregnant or have pregnant women in the household, or the potential of becoming sick. So, 1 to 2 gallons per person per day is a good estimate. And just like our food supply, you'll want at least a 3-day supply of water for each person and pet. But I would say if you can, try to store a 2-week supply if possible. So thinking about different storage containers, there are many options available depending on how much water you plan to store. Everything from 16 ounces there on the left to a 55-gallon drum on the right. Also keep in mind where you're going to store your water and if it's going to be easily accessible. Stored water is your best bet during an emergency, but if you have to evacuate, carrying that 55-gallon drum is going to be nearly impossible. So you may want to have a few different options just in case you don't know what the situation might be. So there's a little formula down there. Take the number of people in your household times your daily amount, 1 to 2 gallons. Make sure to incorporate your pets times the number of days, and then that's how many gallons of water that you will need. So if, let's say your water supply is low, or you're not able to, access it for some reason, these are some additional sources of water that you can tap into, whether inside of your home or outside of your home. Just keep in mind that these sources can become contaminated. So you probably will need additional treatments to make this water safe to drink. And also pay attention to boil orders in your community after a disaster occurs. So why do we want to make sure water is safe? There's lots of different things that can contaminate our water, everything from parasites to bacteria and different viruses. So in an emergency, you don't want to get a water-related illness that could be causing diarrhea or nausea and even temporary paralysis, because it's going to be that much harder for you to bounce back after an emergency situation. So just keep in mind, there's lots of different things that can potentially contaminate water. So we're going to look at some different methods of making water safe to drink. So again, stored water is your best bet, but it's not always accessible. So for that reason, we're going to take a look at boiling water, disinfecting water, and different filtering methods that you can employ. So first off, we have boiling water. Depending on the situation, sometimes this can be more harmful than helpful, since it can concentrate certain chemicals such as nitrites or pesticides in your water. So again, you'll want to pay special attention to your public health department announcements. So they're going to give you the go-ahead of when to do a boil order. So just pay special attention to that. Usually this happens after, the lines have been repaired and there's general disinfection going on in the water supply lines. So to do a boil, you will just, get your pot of water boiling and boil it hard for 1 minute. And this is going to remove any microorganisms that may still be lingering. However, if your water was contaminated with fuel or toxic chemicals or even radioactive material, boiling will not make your water safe. So if you suspect that this may be the case, you'll want to contact your local health department for specific advice. So disinfecting, there's a few different methods that we'll take a look at. One of those is with just your normal chlorine bleach, unscented, of course. There's a table there that shows you how many drops that you would want to add to your water to disinfect it. So it's not very much. These will help kill off, bacteria, viruses, but it's not as effective at controlling against parasites like Cryptosporidium and Giardia. So just keep that in mind. The next disinfecting method is with chlorine dioxide. And like your household bleach, this method is capable of disinfecting against bacteria, viruses, parasites. However, chlorine dioxide is also capable of treating against Cryptosporidium, E. coli. So these are really handy to have on hand. You'll just want to make sure that you follow those directions really carefully, because it does require 4 hours of standing time to disinfect the water before it is safe to drink. So that is quite a long time. You can also find a similar product that takes about 35 minutes, and this is called just like iodine tablets. And you can find iodine in different forms, but Portable Aqua is one brand that you can purchase in the store, usually in the camping sections. You can also find it online. So these will protect against bacteria, viruses. However, they are not as effective against Cryptosporidium. So you will need some sort of like filtering process to help get that out. Also, these are not recommended for long-term use. So more than a few weeks at a time. You don't want to use it too long. And also, it's not recommended for people that are pregnant, have thyroid problems, or a known hypersensitivity to iodine. So I mentioned water filters. There are a lot to choose from. Every time I go to look at the different types available, I'm just astounded at how many different varieties you can find these days. Everything from hand pump filters to gravity-fed filters that sit on your countertop, to your portable filters that are really small and easy to stick in your backpack or your disaster kit that you can easily transport. So when thinking about a type of filter to get, just consider what your water needs are, what you're trying to filter out, which will determine the filter pore size. So if you're wanting to remove parasites, make sure it says that it removes Cryptosporidium and Giardia on the label. And I like to have a couple different methods available. So let's say your stored water is, you can't access it or it's running low. It's good to have a few different options, because if you had the iodine tablets, that is protecting you against a variety of bacteria and viruses, but not the Cryptosporidium, which is a parasite. However, if you have one of these filters that does protect you against Cryptosporidium, it may not protect you against a certain bacteria. So then if you have both methods and you use them jointly, then you will make sure that you are getting everything out of the water that could potentially make you sick. So I always like to tell people to have a couple of different options just in case you don't have access to bottled water or your stored water supply. So we covered a lot of information, and I just wanted to leave you with a few points to remember when it comes to building your emergency food and water supply. Number one, just know the risks in your community and plan accordingly. And if severe weather is approaching, just make sure you have a plan to keep your food safe, such as backup power and dry ice. Also, place food thermometers in your fridge and freezer so you can assess the status of your food when the power is restored. Number two, increase your emergency supply of food and water gradually over time. Try to aim for at least 2 weeks for all people and pets in your household, with a minimum of 3 days. And lastly, try to acquire 2 to 3 methods of water sanitation and filtration in case your water supply is low. And make sure that you take time to practice with these so you are comfortable using them in a stressful emergency situation. And of course, all the information today and throughout this whole series this month is all about helping you become more prepared, developing a preparedness mindset, which will help you bounce back faster and more successfully when disaster strikes, and it can save your life. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Taylor to talk about next week.
All right. Thank you, Kristin, for all that great and useful information on preparing our emergency food and water supply. So coming up next Monday from noon to 1 p.m., we have the impact of hunger and health in disasters presented by myself, Taylor Lesher. So if you haven't registered, you can do so at go.illinois.edu/be prepared. So Kristin has a short survey. I will go ahead and place that link in the chat for us. Let me see here. Okay, so the link is in the chat now. So if you have a few minutes, we kindly ask that you fill that out. It will help us to improve the program for future audiences, so we greatly appreciate that. With that, I just wanted to mention there was one note in the chat box talking about the floods in Kentucky. People were really needing a can opener, so the importance of adding, having a can opener near your canned food items is helpful. So that concludes today's presentation. If you need to hop off, we thank you for joining us. Otherwise, if you have questions, we'll remain online and we will take those now. I do see a question. Yes, so there will be recordings. They will be sent out for those who registered for the series. And then also there are copies of the slides in the reminder emails.